This is our last virtual meeting of this academic year. We will have another one later in the calendar year, but post-conference, we've been doing a lot of work in the evolution and growth of the one IEC presence within SACAC into this virtual group that we have going on within the SIG realm. And, our listening session went really, really well. We collected so many notes. We had an amazing time at conference, just meeting each other, reuniting with each other, sharing ideas, breaking out in, groups to brainstorm on how we can work better together and evolve as not only individual professionals, but, a collective group as a whole. And something that came out of conference was honestly very like ad hoc side, organic conversations with Sean and Anita and some other folks within leadership at SACAC of, hey, we do have a presence here. We're ready to kind of level up. We want to show up for SACAC. We want to show up for our students. We want to be a part of this organization. And also we need a little bit more support. We need a little bit more, attention in some areas. So this is what kind of drummed up this conversation. So Sean has got a pretty awesome deck, if I don't say so myself. He's going to be sharing, some perspective from governance and nominating and just kind of leadership in general of ways that we as IECs can show up for SACAC and also glean from the organization. So I'm going to let him take over from here. I do think Anita oh, she's here. Hey, girl. Oh my God. Sorry. I didn't even see you. So she's kind of listening in, but we will end after this with just kind of an open Q&A. So if there's things that come to mind as it relates to your desires to get involved, your needs, throw them in the chat, write them down, because we will have time at the end to open it up for some conversation. So Sean, happy Thursday. Take it away, my guy.
Happy Thursday. All right. Hey, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces and names. Excited to be here along with Anita. Let me get my screen shared here, and then we can. There we go. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sean Kennedy. My SACAC capacity at present is essentially the fourth year of the presidential cycle, which falls to the task of chairing the Governance and Nominating Committee. That committee is charged with two major tasks. One, the overseeing the board application and selection process, and the award nomination and selection process. So that is kind of where some of this comes from. I'll let Anita unmute momentarily to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everybody. Anita Hua. I am the current SACAC president and will soon be joining Sean. The time goes by real, real fast. So happy to be here and listen. Truly sidekick. I am his Robin to his Batman, but here to listen and answer any questions at the end. But this is all Sean.
Thanks. And in my day job, I'm the co-director of college counseling at Ravenscroft School in Raleigh, North Carolina. So yes, we all have day jobs. So, but anyway, so again, excited to be here. So this came about really from two kind of significant kind of prompts, essentially. One, during my presidency, sort of tail end of 2025-ish, we did a large member survey, and we're very excited actually that that IECs were one of the largest respondent groups that came through. So thank you for those of you that offered your feedback to us. And also from my experience and exposure within the governance and nominating process this past cycle as vice chair of that group as the past president. So part of what we're going to share today is looking at what it means to be, essentially kind of leadership and engagement in volunteer spaces as an opportunity to gain a better sense of belonging in SACAC. And what I'll say from my own experience, and I'm sure that Taylor and Laura and Anita and those of us on the call that have been engaged in SACAC in any particular way, is that sometimes that first step to get, to be vulnerable and to say, hey, listen, I want to be, maybe I'll try for this role or this position and all the rest of that stuff. Sometimes that's the hardest step. So we're gonna lay some things out related to that today. And so the part of that will kind of come through in kind of three big areas. We're really looking at kind of some numbers, just so you kind of understand the size and scope and what things look like from not only the SACAC wide kind of perspective, but also for IECs specifically within SACAC. And then dig into a little bit of that volunteer leadership role and why that is so essential, not only to the organization, but also to members and the things that we do. And then, kind of finish up a little bit with maybe what some of that belonging piece looks like. So, thanks again for your attention. And again, we'll have some time at the end for some questions, but if there's something that comes up in the meantime, feel free to, drop something in the chat. So just so you understand a little bit about SACAC, all right? So we're kind of at the very tail end of our membership cycle year. And so we're sitting at just a little under 2,900 members, which makes us one of the largest affiliates of all of the NACAC affiliates. I think we're third behind the international and New England affiliates. We have only one paid employee, which means that those next two boxes below it, where we have roughly 160 committee volunteers and 26 board members, we've got a lot of volunteer people, right? All of us out there getting paid to do other things and still saying, you know what, I've got more to give, and this is where and how I can do that. I put, just for the basis of reference, what kind of some of those kind of similar numbers are for HECA and IECA. And you see where some of the member numbers, vary a little bit, big differences in the paid staff. And so when you're wondering like, hey, why does SACAC have so many board members? Well, because we don't have a lot of staff. We have one really incredible executive assistant who is paid to do her job, but then the rest are really all people doing other things that are taking the time to have, the most substantial commitment. And that would be, at least from a time standpoint, if you're a president of this, it is a second full-time job, full stop. No, no ifs, ands, or buts. And there's a whole lot of other things to say, listen, that's not my ministry. I have this much time to do both. And so we got a lot of ways we can show that. So that's when you look at like, hey, why are there such a disparity in the number of board members and the rest? Because the board members are working. This is not ceremonial. It is not advisory. It is strategic, it is operational, and it is literally doing the work. So when we talk about the SACAC board as a working board, those folks are the folks are working on that to do all the work that is not done by kind of paid staff and the rest. So that's a little bit about kind of just SACAC in general. As you look at IECs as a constituent group within SACAC, we've got a little bit under 10% of the membership identifies as a essentially full-time IEC. From you think about things like presenters at programs, presenters at annual conference. We've had over this past year about 15 or so IECs that have been a part of engaging in presentations or program work and the rest. At present, we have no board members. That's one of the things we'll talk a little bit more about. And of the 160-ish committee volunteer roles we have, and that includes Taylor and Laura, and serving as SIG leaders, about 8 of the 160 are IECs. So this was one of the things that, as I really started to dig into the numbers on that kind of representation. And as the board looks at that for not just the IEC constituency, but for all constituencies, it really sort of presented an opportunity for us to kind of say, all right, what is it that we can what is it that we can do to try to create space and create opportunities and try to get people motivated and excited potentially to look at engagement in, sort of that volunteer space as a way, not the only way, but a way to try to say, hey, listen, I want to get more involved in SACAC, and how is it that I can do that? So that's part of what we'll want to talk a little bit about, right? So the volunteer roles, one of the cool things that I think sometimes is it might be lost a little bit is the diversity and complexity and range of opportunities and ways that there are to contribute as a volunteer within SACAC. And so I want to kind of try to break those down as much as possible. Now, a lot of what I'll refer to are not necessarily the board positions specifically, but that group of about 160 or so of things that are committee volunteers. So within the government relations committee, within the state and area initiatives committee, within member relations, those kind of subcommittees and efforts that are aligned and sort of fall within those large board committees, these are really the things that we're getting at. So one of the cool things about it is just how many different types of roles you can have. So there are things, as you'll see, like say, if you're really interested in professional development and learning, there are, again, committee volunteer roles where you can get involved in, whether it's one of the summer programs that we have that are multi-day, very kind of much more complex professional development programs. And then there's also things like being a state chair within state and area initiatives, where you might be developing a one-day, half-day virtual content program and the rest. There are going to be ones that have more of a financial component to it. Talk about managing a budget provided to you by the board, or looking for programs, and things of that sort, where you're like, okay, like this is something I love those numbers. I like to build a budget for the cost of a program. Those are things that might be there. We also have programs that don't have a financial component to it, if that's something that is not what you're about. There's opportunity. We've really tried to resurrect the mentoring program a little bit, and that's kind of getting its legs back under it within the member relations program. So opportunities to serve as a mentor to other members, potential, that's another opportunity. So there's lots of different types of things that you can do. The scale and the scope of them also varies widely. So you'll find that some of the roles that are available are ones that are for the entire association. So you think about something with like an association-wide program. You think about Sweet Tea Tour, Dry Run, Summer Seminar, those kind of things, where the impact that you're having by being, whether it's a committee leader in it or a presenter at any of those are things where you're going to connect with people from across our association and sometimes even beyond it. There are also going to be ones that are very state specific, and you'll see those when those come out in the What's Coming Wednesday member emails that come out. That's where it might say, hey, this state needs a co-chair for government relations. Now, obviously, if you're not in that state or you're not working with students in that state, that may not be quite as appealing or appropriate for you for that role, but there are ones of that type, right? Again, kind of the state focused, but also the association-wide focus one. The timing also, we have things that are really, really kind of round the clock, year-round programming, where the work you are doing is might be year-round in preparation for a program that happens in the summer or at some other particular point. There may also be things that are very seasonal. You think about the annual conference in particular, that happens, in a lot of the work and the volunteering. We need a lot of help at the conference just to get the conference to be as great an experience it was. Now, that may not require you to do months worth of preparation in advance of it. It might just be like, hey, if you're going to be at the conference, great. We need your help with X, Y, or Z. And that's something that you're kind of showing up or doing. And then when the conference is done, so is your role, right? But again, you filled a really important role. So part of the reason I wanted to kind of frame this, in this way is that not all roles require the same things of you, and the rest. And, hope that as you start to look at the What's Coming Wednesday emails and see those, that you'll be able to kind of look and try to do your best to say, okay, all right, maybe this is a state specific thing that doesn't necessarily, apply to me, but these others I am very interested in. In my experience, when I moved from California to North Carolina 22 years ago, I joined SACAC. I knew no one in the area. And I didn't really know, okay, hey, I'm a member of this organization, but what does it look like to get more connected? A friend of mine, the late Myron Burney, had kind of connected me with some, said, hey, like you should do more, and what does that look like? And so I started to get involved. And actually, my first role was just being a program volunteer at what was called the Mini Camp College. Now it's, college admission workshop. And these are student and kind of parent and guardian facing programs that are done sort of regionally in the rest. And I just signed up to be a speaker and a presenter and helping out at the program. I wasn't running it. I wasn't doing anything, but it was amazing what it helped me do to get connected to people. And I was in Winston-Salem at the time in North Carolina, but I went all the way down to Charlotte to do the Charlotte program. So that beget a whole series and chain of other things that eventually, it found me getting more and more involved. So it didn't start with some big role. It started with something very, very small. And that gave me the understanding and ability to say, hey, wow, like what a cool way to get involved in this thing beyond just paying the membership fee and reading the emails and going to the conference when I can. So that, those roles, and, one of the things that we do with those roles is they generally have a term associated with them. That's generally typically 2 to 3 years at the most. So if you see something, you're like, oh, that sounds really cool. If there's someone in that role, just be patient, because we try to cycle through people, not because we want you to have to stop doing the work, but we also want to create access to those roles for new people. So keep that in mind as you're looking, because I think that's a really great way to find the thing that best aligns with what it is you like to do and ways you feel really comfortable contributing. Part of the reason I bring this up now, as we kind of zoom and move from kind of that committee volunteer role into sort of the board level, is the kind of the expectations and kind of typical kind of profile for board members. So I went back and looked at essentially the last 5 to 6 board cycles and the applications for every single person that had applied for the board and those who were selected, because I was really curious, like, what are the patterns? Like, we hear a lot about hey, well, it's a popularity contest. It's it's not an old boys network, because I think I was the oldest person on the board, and I'm not that old when I was on it. But that idea of the misnomers about what it is that this represents. And so there were a couple of really kind of compelling factors that came through in that. And so that every single board member who was selected over the past 5 cycles had some type of committee volunteer leadership role. Now, the cool thing about it, again, back to that variety we talked about, was that it wasn't, it's only people that did stuff in this committee or that committee. A lot of times it was a combination of presenting at things and then serving in a volunteer role, right? But there were ways that those folks had said, you know what, I have, more time, beyond my work and personal and family commitments, all the rest of that stuff, that I'm really curious about this work and eager to do that. That showing up in that way has been really, really important as a signal that the increased responsibility of being a board member within SACAC and all that work that I talked about, right? Remember, there's no extra employment. We've got one person. We're not hiring in that way, and the rest that we've got to try to get people that are say, listen, who is best positioned to try to fill this greater expectation as a board member, not only of doing the work that board members are expected to do, but leading the others who are doing that work within those committees and programs and all the rest, right? So Laura and Taylor as a SIG leader within the member relations committee. The member relations committee is managing other groups and committees and efforts simultaneously while they're helping the SIG leaders and the rest, right? So that leadership and SACAC piece is really, really key. So if you're wondering, and hey, what is it that I would like to be a board member at some point? That's awesome. Keep that aspiration, stay focused on that, and look for those ways to try to get into some of those committee, volunteer roles, because that can make a big, big impact. One of the things that I was also surprised by was that the percentage that had leadership in NACAC was not, it was clearly a presence with 46%, but there was also, as 54% that didn't. I have never held a role of any type within NACAC. All of my kind of focus in this regard was related to SACAC. So we have some people that are in it that have done things with SACAC, whether it's committee or within NACAC, with their committee work or whatever that is. But that is not a necessity, an expectation, or a requirement. It would be, kind of viewed as something like, hey, that's great. You have involvement in that as well. Cool. Right. But it's, again, not a requirement. The leadership elsewhere piece, that was also really fascinating, because this is where you get into stuff that has nothing to do with SACAC. It may be other organizations. You think about IECA or HECA, if you have roles there. I mean, we've had people that have been in, junior league. We have people that have been coaches that have been, before they got into this work, that were, had other roles and, other under industries and sectors and the rest, that had, responsibilities there. So people that had some great things that, in addition to that SACAC leadership and maybe some that NACAC stuff, had a lot of other skills and knowledge that they bring to the board up from that has been accrued at other points in their life or on other places in their life beyond what they're doing right now. And the last data point on there about sort of the professional and personal impact, that was one of the things about in the comments. We ask in the application just to write about, is there anything else you want to share, about your eagerness with being SACAC. How every single board applicant, even those not selected, talked about how much that the things that they've been involved in SACAC, how it has benefited their professional and personal lives. You've got the people that, the friendships and the connections you develop, like I know Taylor and Laura through SACAC, right? I know Anita through SACAC. Some of my closest friends in the world are people that I have known and met through here, whether I've been on the board with them or not. And that's from somebody who I'd never been to the South before I moved here. I had no footprint here, knew nothing, knew nobody. And, over time, SACAC was the way that I got connected to not only the professional opportunities that have really changed my life, but also some of the people as well. And that's really at the heart of this, that no matter, and when my time is done and I'm not doing webinars for SACAC in this way anymore, and I'm just a member again, that I still have those people, right? And I still have those connections. So I felt that it was really fascinating just to kind of extract from some of those board applications some of these elements that I hope, as you look at that and you see, if you're thinking and contemplating that as part of your professional journey to, be kind of one of the senior leaders and officers within it, that these are at least some statistics that have borne themselves out in real time as we go, as we've seen in recent years. Oops, go back for a second here. So part of this thesis is the idea that the ways to feel included and belong in SACAC, a lot of that requires engagement, right? It requires that opting in. It requires figuring out from, where you are in your personal and professional life, do I have the instinct and desire to provide more and get engaged and find the right lane and the right tempo at which I can do that and still be successful in my day job, because that's an important part, because the day jobs should not sacrifice, should not be sacrificed for those. So again, I think about sort of the bringing closer to other people. And what's cool about even just you think about on this call, how many different states and places that we are all, joining this call from, and how much we are, this is a connection point, right? There's not a lot of industries that connect people in quite the way that we do. So that's where those kind of volunteer opportunities are a great way to connect to totally different people from all over the place. And our organization in particular, with blending IECs, high school counselors, college admission officers, CBO, and other kind of organizational leaders and the rest. You can meet people from all over the place and that are doing all kinds of different roles. It was interesting to hear the banter about the Mississippi State fly-in. Like, what a cool way to, like, all right, this call connects you to an opportunity, and hey, that's how that should work. We mentioned, I spoke about kind of getting closer to SACAC through some of those volunteer roles. It's amazing what you learn about this organization when you are participating in the delivery and execution and operations of it, and just how many other great people there are that are working to try to say, hey, like, Anita and I and the presidential team talked a lot about how the importance that, we feel very strongly that SACAC needs to exist, no matter where this world takes us, and that it doesn't, what it is does not happen exclusively without everybody getting involved in the rest. And I also really love the idea that this is some of these different volunteer roles are a great way to challenge and grow professionally. I mean, I think about the things that you're tasked when, depending on what your role is, from a committee volunteer all the way up to the presidential team, you are going to be doing things that you perhaps have not done before professionally. And you're doing them in the name of the organization and learning, and all of that type of stuff where trying to train to learn how to do stuff. People develop, we've got board members that their first time, not just managing a budget and saying, hey, don't spend more than this number, but how do you develop the budget from scratch? And we've got committees that are doing that, right? So those are some examples of ways that it may be like, hey, I've never done anything like this before, but you've got an environment that tries to be as supportive as possible in doing that. And you get to work with people that are, not in the office next to you, for example. In particular, that's usually the way too, because we're a virtual organization that gets together, and has fun and has a great time when we can in-person things, particularly at the conference. But otherwise, we're meeting and joining on Zoom, and that's how often we have to do things. So part of the reason that I wanted to bring, I mentioned kind of at the beginning some of the ways in which where this kind of the genesis of this came from. I mentioned the 2025 member survey. And again, as I mentioned, we had really, really strong IEC representation among the respondents. And one of the significant themes that we began talking about in earnest as a board and as a presidential team not longer after that was that perception and the responses that related to the feelings of, exclusion or not feeling included among the IEC members. And so part of what the combination of talking about ways to get more engaged is one part of that, but then also trying to figure out what that means. Because I will say that in addition to the comments about, not being included, there wasn't quite as much put forward or proffered on, okay, well, what does inclusion look like for an IEC in our membership? And so that's part of where we wanted to come here, to you all to, if you had ideas, and it sounds like you guys had a good brainstorming session, at the SIG meeting, but to get a chance to, hear from you all about ways that inclusion could look stronger, that the sense of belonging could be greater. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to see if Anita has anything if she wants to add on this particular theme, but then would love to hear from you all.
I'm just going to say I'd be a little remiss without actually, Sean was going through all of these great stats at the beginning in terms of IEC demographic representation. And there are two people on this call who have served as former board members of SACAC, because I know that because I served when they did originally. And Kim and Melinda, you don't get to scoot away and just be observant in this conversation because y'all are repping hard. But also Deborah Lannisberg, who is not on this call. When I first joined SACAC and obviously on the board, she was actually, when I did drive run, she was my roommate. Well, sweet mate, roommate, I don't remember. We shared a space for dry run faculty. And so I think that one of the most important things to me has been taking a pause and also recognizing the people who came before us. So in those stats, while there's nothing current, I absolutely want to acknowledge that there are people on this call and in this great community who have done a lot of great work for SACAC. So I just wanted to take a moment there too, because sometimes history gets away from us, and it wasn't that long ago. I'm gonna say that for me, maybe not for Kim and Melinda, but it wasn't that long ago that we were sitting and sharing some space as former board members. So shout out to Melinda and Kim on this call.
And also Deb Ryan, who's part of the governance and nominating committee. Thank you, Deb, for joining us and being part of that. But want to just open the floor, and again, think about ideas, or and again, that could be ideas you have of things we aren't doing. Could be things that we are doing that maybe we're not doing in a way that is as inclusive. Policy things, if you have questions about that, if there are things you don't know and you want to ask questions about, hey, can IECs do this or that in the organization, we can try to answer those as well. So we got a chat here. One of the things we discussed at SACAC was a Slack group for all of us. Okay, thank you, Megan.
I can chime in about that. Yeah, one of the things I think this has nothing to do with what you were just asking for, Sean. So this will officially serve as the pause for people to gather their thoughts and get ready to ask questions. But because me and Laura do enough talking, this is y'all's time. We had tried to figure out a better way, since SACAC is working on the current platform that we use as the member hub as being a little bit more of a better resource as they get to know and learn what the capabilities are. We found that Slack could be a great place that's external, but still a way for us to stay connected. That's not an email thread or, webinars where, it's a lot of talking and not a lot of collaboration. So Laura and I, in full transparency, it is a high desire. We have not quite gotten to the execution, but 1000% it's coming. We think it's a great idea. And yes. So thank you for that reminder, Megan.
And Taylor, can I just add, we are exploring and have been for a while. Everything costs money, as y'all know, everything costs money, but we are exploring through Growth Zone, so the SACAC member portal. There is an opportunity that there could be some committee and community engagement opportunities where you also wouldn't even have to use this SACAC Zoom that has Diana's name, so like affiliated with it in all spaces, but that there could be more engagement. We're looking into that. As we said, it costs money, but that's one of the things that we hope to put in the budget this year. So it could serve as something in between, depending on how soon y'all are able to get that off the ground. So just we'll share more with y'all if that is a thing, because it would be designed specifically for SIG groups and committees and that type of thing. So
Love it. Thank you.
Can hi everyone, I'm Ruth. I think Sean, I don't know if you remember me when I was at St. Mary's.
I do. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, of course, Ruth.
so one thing I wanted to bring, because I think sometimes with IECs, like we've been on both sides of the desk. We've been in higher ed, we were counselors, and then now we're starting our own. And one of the things and I should have done it, but at the time I wasn't sure. So when you guys had for the seminar that you do for like intros to new people coming into the admissions field. You guys were looking for faculty. At that time, some of the description on there, I felt at one point where I'm like, well, I'm not a school counselor, I'm not a college rep, but also with all the knowledge that I had. And I should have submitted an application just because I like for me, it was like, I do know this stuff and I would love to share that experience. But there was something within that kind of held me back as an
Mhm.
IEC. And so that was where I was just kind of like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be, maybe I don't like quote unquote under those requirements. So I think that's also sometimes being, when we look at some of the volunteer opportunities, is there a possibility that, it can be open up to us as well too, because we are still a plethora of information, but there was just how it was written that,
Mm.
I mean, for me, I should have reached out to one of y'all and been like, hey, like, do IECs consider as this option for helping out as well? Because again, like I've been on the volunteer side with like in my other regions when I was living in New York and doing presentations, but that was me undergrad for undergraduate admissions. But like being now on this side of the desk, it's kind of like, where do I fall? And so that
Mhm.
was one thing that I was like, I kind of wish I had done, because I know I had that time in my schedule to be like, hey, I want to do this. I want to be informative, and be able to share my experiences in the time that I've been on all sides of the desk. So I just wanted to throw that out as just knowledge wise of, how we write the descriptions.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and again, I think, if you go back far enough in sort of the SACAC days, and Anita mentioned it with some of the past board members are on here, the breakdown and composition of membership has changed so dramatically, and there was certainly a time and period where secondary, school-based counselors and higher ed folks were the overwhelming majority of members, right? And now, as we're seeing in even, I don't have the exact specific breakdown, but we're actually between like IECs and public high school counselors and the rest. We're now, well, at least a third of our membership comes from those two constituencies, right? And so we're starting to see some real shifts in the way that some of that legacy descriptions and that particularly for legacy programs like dry run and summer seminar, there are times where it's like, hey, are we changing anything? Yes, no, okay, let's use the same content. So that's important for us to hear that. And we're looking at some of those same things within the governance and nominating committee process about some of the ways that we put that out there to make that language not make you pause and quietly retreat rather than opt in. So that's great feedback, Ruth. Thank you.
can I just add, Ruth, that is actually timely feedback. We're working on a very lofty goal where basically when a member logs into Growth Zone, you can see all of the volunteer opportunities listed, even if they're not available. Like if they've been filled, you can know who that committee chair currently is. But we're working to have all of that lined out so that when someone says, I'm just interested and I don't know if my skill set matches this, that, and the third, you can actually go to one place, see all of the opportunities, whether they're vacant or not, because you might plan for 2 years from now that you could actually apply for that thing. But that's actually really great feedback as we work to build this lofty thing, that it would be, we'd be thoughtful about who it might feel exclusive to. And if there's a reason for that, that we might actually describe that there too. So, which I don't know why we would have any exclusions for anything, but I think that's just really good feedback as we take this on. So thank you for that. It's actually really timely.
Deb, I think you saw your hand next.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. So I'll just say I think the onus is kind of on both sides, actually, in this relationship. I think it's very relationship based. Um, I'll just reiterate, honestly, doing SACAC volunteering has probably been some of the most meaningful stuff that I've ever done in my professional career. I love it. I love the people I've met. I love the experiences and the thoughtfulness of that. And so I do think part of it is that folks need to kind of raise their hands. I think that we as IECs need to take a deep breath and then raise our hands and volunteer for things, sign up for things, even if it's something really small. I think that's important. I do also think that there is still a little bit of a mythology about what IECs are and what we do, even though when I was at conference, the number of people who talked to me about wanting to become an IEC was a lot. But I think there's still a little bit of the sort of varsity blues, like all y'all are sticking kids' faces on, water polo bodies. And so I think that in terms of, again, the language that the organization uses, but also opportunities for IECs to speak about how we work and the ethical standards that we live by, I think is important. And one of the things that Sean and I talked about is also just doing some IEC training within SACAC. NACAC, I'm taking over the IEC SIG for NACAC. They're doing a lot of that training now. They're sort of moving into that space. A lot of people who are in this field don't belong to IECA or HECA, but I do think it's important for people to understand the sort of the overarching principles by which we can make our profession better. So I think that a space for SACAC to actually give IECs opportunities to talk about what we do and the ethical standards that we abide by and how we are partners in this. So I think it's on both sides, right? I think people need to raise their hands, but I also think we can create specific opportunities for IECs to raise their voices. So, and I'm just grateful. I love SACAC with all my heart, so I'm grateful.
You mentioned some of the things that other organizations are doing, and I saw that Libby, you mentioned something about the summer seminar program, which has traditionally been for school-based secondary counselors. And I'm curious, as you think about kind of what IECA, HECA provide, what NACAC provides, you think about the various University of California campuses that provide college counseling certificates. I mean, there's, is there, I mean, what does that space look like in terms of I want to do this work. I want to transition from somewhere else, right? It doesn't,
Yeah.
What does that look like? Is it flooded? Is there an opportunity? Is it something that
I think there's lots of opportunity for that. And I also think there are knowledge bases, right? And so I think there are very specific things to know about the SEC and the ACC and about Southern private schools and about how high schools work in the South. So I think there's absolutely opportunity for us to move into that field and not necessarily like take over that field or do, huge program, but I think there's space for at least introductory programming because there are a ton of people who want to move into this role. Introductory programming and regional specific information for folks, right? Like, what are the things you need to know about being an IEC where we are? Because I think the UC stuff is really great, but that's not super pertinent to me, right? So that's not even, or the UC programming, like the UC certificates, those are great, but I don't think you need to do all of them. I think it would be an opportunity to create something that is really SACAC specific and Southeast United States specific. I think there's always space for people to become better at this work and to understand what the work is. And we are drawing from extraordinary professionals in the field from both sides of the desk, right? That could participate in that process. So I don't think it's flooded.
Yeah. Okay.
Deb, just on the tails of that, I'm gonna pop in, pop out because I see two more hands and want to make space. But I would love and wish that I had seen like a low stakes pilot for that, or some of that is like a pre-conference session at SACAC because they don't cost anything and it's 3 hours. So just throwing that nugget out there. I'm not over the session proposals right now. That is Pamela Bowie, but I'm just throwing that out there as a nugget because it could be a really good pilot before we even launch other big programming. But I'm on board. There's a space for all of
There's
that.
absolutely, and I think the more low risk, low stakes that you make it for folks, the more that they're going to feel invited into those spaces. Absolutely. And I'm just going to volunteer right now. I am super psyched. If you do this stuff, I'm happy to volunteer for it. So,
That's great. Jennifer, I think you were next.
Yeah, and Deb, you said a lot of what I was going to say, and I would love to be part of that training and helping. In terms of thinking about how IECs don't feel like the organization is fully inclusive to them, I think that the organization is inclusive to us. Like, it's amazing to me that you all are here and welcoming our feedback. I think it's more about some of the relationships that IECs have or don't have with school counselors, and exactly what Deb was saying, the mythology. And I'd love to kind of brainstorm on how we can build these relationships with school-based counselors and IECs and how we best partner together. What is the best way forward? Because we all have our specific roles. And I do think, to Deb's point, a lot of IECs maybe aren't appropriately trained. IECA is currently going through a new credentialing process. Maybe that will help with some of this. But I think if we can help with some of the underlying relationships and just coming from a place of trust that we're all working together, that would really help. Because I don't think it's the organization is the leaders of the organization. You're trying to make everyone feel welcome, but it's more just everyone in the organization. Maybe exactly what Deb said, the mythology. Maybe there's been some bad eggs in the past, but just trying to see how we can work together and build trust in each other. That, I think, will make IECs feel welcome and feel more included.
It's great. Thank you for sharing that. Carrie, I think you were next.
So I just was at my very first SACAC conference. I made my way here through NJACAC. And I always heard that SACAC was the conference to go to, which I 100% agree. It was by far the best conference that I had attended. And I went to the SIG meeting and I was like, wow, this is all so welcoming. The very last session I attended, a school counselor slammed IECs. And it almost got like a round of applause. And I was so sorry, but that I didn't just immediately confront it. But for some reason, at that moment, I did not. And I left really regretting that I did not do that. But that is, unfortunately, I think where the negativity comes from. And there needs to be that education. Deb, I'm happy to also get involved with anything that comes of this. Um, but there needs to be, I think, even for the presenters, to be told ahead of time that please do not allow there to be negativity towards any member, any group in these sessions. It's not just towards IECs. I mean, we wouldn't want an IEC slamming school counselors. So there's no room for that. And again, I thought the conference was just phenomenal.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think the idea that, I mean, if you're talking conference, you've got the right person with Anita here as a past conference chair and the rest. And I know that we've seen in the past couple years more of a necessity of what we share with presenters and the rest in terms of disclaimers on things and all manner of different things. And I think it's an important evolution that we're all here for one another and ultimately supporting young people and their parents and guardians and the rest. And we're all doing it in different ways. And that's a good thing to be mindful of as we offer that feedback to future presenters, not just at the conference, but other programs as well.
I actually really like that comment because I think about, trying to pass along some good thoughts to Pamela as she engages with all of that. And a couple of years ago, we actually came up with that slide that everybody has to do at the beginning of their session that basically says, like, this is the opinions of, do not belong to the SACAC and all the things. And I think that was with the intention of some things like that happening, unfortunately. But what I love is that every year we get better with, like, we might be able to even share what we might call like a best practices document for presenters, right? To keep in mind that you might have a session related to this thing and you might have others in this group, and relationships are so important, and just be mindful. It's not going to stop everybody from saying things out the side of their neck because people exist as humans, but I certainly do appreciate that. That's a nice reminder because every year we try to get better about the way that we engage with presenters. And to Sean's point, even beyond conference, I think it's a good idea just to some nice helpful tips and reminders for people. Whether they read it or not is a different story.
I do think that that's ways that Sean and Anita, former board members, people, Kim headed up Sweet Tea Tour. I headed up a couple years of Dry Run, to be able to speak from that perspective and to be seen on this side of the profession. Jerry, I'm really sorry that that was the experience, especially at the end of your conference. That is not the SACAC experience that I would want somebody to leave with. And I'm really sorry that happened. But I do think there are ways that, as a former board member, I can continue to speak to that. So I really appreciate you sharing that in this space today.
Try to miss it.
How about we take one more from Meg, or wait, who just had their hand raised?
That was me.
Yeah, one more, and then we probably should.
Yeah. So just, Jerry, just thank you and to go off on that. I find that it's a lot of the name tag stuff. Like, I did experience a little bit of, you're an IEC. And I don't know if it's helpful or not. I go into defense mode. I'm like, I worked in public schools for 19 years. Like, I automatically go into defense mode, and I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I feel like not an imposter because I know I belong, but maybe an imposter, right? Like, I feel like, which I think our clients feel and everyone feels. But then what's interesting is, anytime this happens, people naturally say, well, how did you do this? And mine came because I moved from New Jersey to Florida during COVID. I had no friends. So I started Zooming with neighbors for free, literally to bribe them into becoming my friend. Like, that is a true story. And really just so I could get the lay of the land down here a little bit in Florida. And the two people who were kind of like, you're an IEC. We're like, would you ever be willing to present on the transition from counseling to IEC? And I was like, yep. And I actually would love to do that, love an opportunity to that. And I think the more that people recognize, reaching across the aisle, right, which I think we need more of everywhere in the world, I think that would be helpful. And like, I would love an opportunity to do that because I really did start kind of on accident. When I moved, my husband was transferred, I had to resign, and there was no schools were hiring, and I had to figure it out. And that's exactly what I did.
with the Deb, I believe you had made a comment about people performing the IEC function who are not HECA or IECA members. And please correct me if I'm wrong about the the distinction seen within the IEC community related to that. Is that fair that there is
I think
could you say more about that?
yeah. Well, so first I'll say, Megan, Jade Domain and I are going to be putting together proposal for the next conference about the transition into the IEC field. So you'll be getting a call.
I would love to. I would absolutely love to help with that.
Yeah,
Love.
and honestly, like that was the most conversations I had. I think, Sean, for people who belong to IECA and HECA, and am a member of IECA, and I have also been a member of HECA in the past. I think for those people, there is a really strong distinction. From the many conversations I had at SACAC, a lot of people don't know that they exist, or also don't necessarily have belonged or have thought that that wasn't a space for them. So again, my biggest concern always is our profession and how our profession is viewed and the ethical standards that we can kind of have everyone embrace in our profession. And that's where I think SACAC sort of moving into that training space and education space can be important, because what it's really doing is it's making that our profession better. And so for people who are choosing not to belong to either of those two professional organizations, for whatever reason it might be, that they are still also understanding the role of an IEC, the partnerships that we create, the communications that we should have, how we can, abide by ethical standards. It raises all boats, right? Like it's making our profession better. So that's kind of my take on that, is what I would say.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, because I mean, I understand that those organizations have different barriers to membership, and expectations and the rest that we don't have. We've got a lower bar within that regard related to our profession, and there's something to be said for that type of accessibility, particularly if you're new and starting out,
1,000,000%.
and you want to get immediately plugged into a network. So, but it is important as the idea as we start talking around the idea of some type of opportunity for new people, that are new in that role to connect, and whether that's what you were describing with some of like this Southeastern specific stuff or not, that what is the basis for the standards, right? Because there aren't there's very little standardized. We know that from all the changes with the NACAC, practices and the SPGP and all the rest that, those are, that's changed pretty significantly. So it's helpful to just kind of understand a little bit more about that as it relates to, okay, is there a standard like, no, this like ASCA, like the ASCA standard is if you are X, then you follow this particular line of thinking and the rest. Like if there is something that is akin to that or similar to that, that would need to be sort of the basis from which everything was built or developed if there was something more.
And I think HECA and IECA, if you looked at their mission statements and kind of what they think about ethics, they're very, very similar. I also think NACAC is again moving into that space. They are creating the sort of ethical standards for IECs programming. And so again, I think it's just the more that we can reiterate that message with a view to how do we operate in our space, in our region, I think it just, again, makes everybody better, because people are maybe not accessing any of those other venues, but they are SACAC members because they've been historical SACAC members, because SACAC is amazing, because it's lovely, because it's not as expensive, for whatever reason. It's a way for us to get that messaging across and to help bring people into the fold.
Sure. Yeah.
I know we have to go, but I do think that's interesting though. Like ultimately, would you want to, by joining SACAC as an IEC, have some policy that you would join IECA or HECA within the next year? I mean, you can join IECA and HECA as a student member, or at least for IECA you can. So you don't have to have a lot of experience. It's not like it's a barrier. But I personally don't understand why anyone wouldn't be in one of those two organizations, because there's so much education involved. We're growing. There's the ethics piece of it. But I just wonder if somehow, you have to hit some at least promise to do that so that we
Yeah,
would
but
be.
Jennifer, I'll say the number of, and I know you guys have to leave, but the number of conversations I had at the conference where people have joined or know about them and have made a very conscious choice not to. So again, for me, it's much more, I don't need to make any impositions on people. I want to make sure they understand how to operate in this world in the best way that makes us all better. So.
Yeah.
Guys, this has been amazing. I really hope there's not another SIG trying to get into the Zoom room. So we are going to end. I've been taking notes. We have been recording. You will hear from Laura and I. Sean, Anita, literally, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just literally feels like a big warm hug to have this conversation. So we just really appreciate it. And even for all the IECs that weren't here today, like literally big hugs. Thank you. All the things.
Absolutely.
Excited to see what's going to come of this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for letting us join.
Of course. All right, y'all.
Anytime.
Have a great week.
Bye, y'all.